A woman's life is not a lesson, but over and over again she is forced to pay the price for the things society refuses to learn. She's still punished for existing, still shamed for choosing, still abandoned by systems that were never built with her in mind. When the law says no, when society says shame on you, when safety is something you have to fight for instead of something you're afforded, women are forced into impossible corners. And sometimes those corners cost them everything. This isn't just a story from the past, it's a mirror held up to now. The faces change, the names change, but the heartbreak stays the same. Welcome to If These Trees Could Talk.
We would like to acknowledge the land that we are recording on today, Wonnarua land, as well as the land that the story is taking place on today, which is Wonnarua and Awabakal, you tell me.
Yes, correct.
We would like to acknowledge that this land is, was and always will be traditional Aboriginal land. We would like to acknowledge all Aboriginal people, past, present and emerging, and all Aboriginal people listening today across all of the lands that you are listening from.
There were less hospitals than there were orphanages. Privilege is knowing there's a problem and not caring about it because it doesn't affect you. He went home and he did nothing. He didn't contact police. He didn't put in a missing persons report. He did nothing. There is a bigger fish to fry in this. It's the people who are making decisions about women's bodies, and it has happened forever. Blessed day, Megan.
We've been sent good weather.
Praise be. Clearly, I am neck deep in the newest season of Handmaids, which came out on Tuesday, and friend of the pod, Rach, came over to my house on Tuesday night with brownies that she baked like a domestic goddess, and we drank wine, and we ugly cried through the first episode, and I won't say anything about it, just in case our listeners haven't watched it yet and aren't like us and we're counting down the days to it coming out like Christmas. But there's a few ties while I've been writing this that's like bouncing back between the two. So I just thought that that might be a little funny introduction. And to anybody out there that listens, that watches it, I see you right now. It's big. There's a lot going on.
I love how you make parallels between history and what's happening now and any sort of streaming service that you've been paying attention to.
We should really be sponsored by some streaming services. I do spend a lot of time streaming stuff. Yes. I love it. And I learn about what I think about things by watching stuff that destroys me emotionally. So today we are not travelling, except back in time a little bit. I am sharing a story from here, our hometown. Just the same as many women in every town all over the world will either have their own story or heard a story just like this. And if neither of those things are true, then they wouldn't have to dig very far to find one. The Handmaid's reference isn't just cause I'm watching it. It does tie into this story. Margaret Atwood, who wrote the book, which is classed as fiction, says that nothing in The Handmaid's Tale is pure invention. Every major event has a precedent somewhere in history. She refused to put anything into it that hadn't already happened to a woman somewhere at some point. Atwood wanted The Handmaid's Tale to ring true, to feel horrifying, not because it was alien, but because it was frighteningly familiar. And I'm sharing this story today with the same goal in mind. I apologise, Megan, to you in advance.
A pre-warning always means it's going to be a doozy.
Yeah, it's a doozy. Let's time travel. The Hunter River area in New South Wales was initially inhabited by the Wanneroo and Awabakal people for thousands of years before European settlement. European exploration began in the 1790s with Lieutenant John Shortland discovering, and I'm using air quotes because that was the word that was used in the research, discovering the area in 1797 while searching for escaped convicts. The area was formally named the Hunter River in the same year after Captain John Hunter, the Governor of New South Wales. Originally, Newcastle was established as a penal settlement chosen for its isolation and its value of its coal seams. For years, it was a place of punishment and hard labour. Its early population made up mostly of convicts and soldiers, but as the need for new land and resources grew, the colony gradually opened up the region to free settlers. With this shift, Newcastle and the broader Hunter Valley entered a new phase of rapid expansion and development. Still, life along the Hunter was not without its hardships. While opportunities abounded, settlers faced the harsh realities of frontier life, ongoing conflict with Aboriginal communities whose lands were being taken, and the constant challenge of building infrastructure needed to support growing towns and industries. In the early days of European settlement, the Hunter River became a vital lifeline for trade and transport, helping towns like Morpeth and Newcastle flourish. The area around the river was rich in resources, fertile soils, abundant timber, and most significantly, coal. Further inland, settlement pushed into the bushlands beyond the river. Around the 1820s, European settlers began to establish themselves in the area now known as Cessnock. What started as a quiet rural stop along an early cattle route between the Hunter Valley and Sydney soon grew into a thriving community. Its rich soils and abundant water made it ideal for grazing and agriculture, and in time, the discovery of coal would add even greater momentum to its growth, which drew men eager to build new lives and large fortunes. Life for the women who stood beside these men in the early Australian colonies was tough. Out in the rough country, far from growing towns of Sydney or Newcastle, women weren't just raising families, they were holding whole communities together, often with little more than grit, hard work, and each other. They lived in rough huts, often miles from the nearest neighbour, and their days were endless. Before the sun was even up, women would be baking bread, hauling water, sewing and cleaning clothes, feeding animals, looking after kids, and helping clear land. There wasn't such a thing as men's work and women's work, despite what polite society would have you believe, when survival was on the line. You just did whatever needed doing, and that hasn't changed much. Marriage back then wasn't always about love. For a lot of women, especially the convict women, it was a way to find a bit of security in a world that could be cruel and lonely. It wasn't simple. Women had to be careful because one wrong move could see them left out in the cold with no way to make a living, thrown into an institution, or even dead. Along with all the hardship, there were rules, mostly unwritten, about a woman's reputation. And if you slipped up, it could cost you everything. These early values were written into the fabric of our society. Women carried heavy labels that were hard to shake. If you were a convict woman, it didn't matter how small your crime had been. You were seen as tainted from the moment you stepped off that ship. If you had a child out of wedlock, the stigma clung to you and your baby, if you were one of the lucky few who didn't have your child taken from you. Even women who grew up as orphans after losing their parents to disease, accidents, alcohol, or the brutality of the new world could be branded as troublemakers simply because they didn't have a proper family to vouch for them. In small communities, gossip was as dangerous as any drought or flood. A whisper about your past could see you pushed out. Women knew they had to tread carefully, not just for their own sake, but for the sake of their children's futures. And yet, despite the judgment and the fear, women still found ways to support each other. They built quiet networks of trust because they knew if they didn't look after each other, no one else would. Today we're going to have a chat about two of these women. Two women who, if not for their need and offer of support, may have never crossed paths. I'm going to start our story with an article from the Grafton Daily Examiner that was published on the 20th of October 1916. Woman's body found foul play suspected. The body of a woman believed to be between 30 and 40 years of age was found floating in the Paterson River this morning, fully clothed. Her feet were tied together with clothesline and her arms were lashed to the side with wire. A piece of iron weighing about 50 pounds was attached to her body, which appears to have been in the water for approximately 3 weeks. Foul play is suspected. 4 days later, on Tuesday the 24th of October 1916, this was printed in the Tamworth Daily Observer. Tragic discovery of woman's body in Paterson River. The police have successfully identified the body of an unfortunate woman floating in the Paterson River on Wednesday afternoon. She had been confirmed as Ada Murray, aged 30, a married woman who lived with 3 children at Gallagher Estate in Cessnock. Ada's husband, Walter Murray, enlisted in the army 12 months ago and has since been wounded in France. He is currently recovering in England. Walter was formerly a miner at Weston and Cessnock. Inspector Walker, Detective Surridge, Sergeant Holman and Constable Kennedy are currently investigating the case. Through persistent inquiries, they have established that Ada left her home on October 2nd, taking an early morning train. She told a friend she was travelling to Maitland Hospital for an appendicitis operation. However, it has been confirmed that she never went to the hospital. The case is made all the more tragic by the fact that just 8 days before her death, Ada received a letter from her husband, which was full of affectionate words. In the letter, Walter reassured her not to worry, stating he was recovering and that she should continue to send their children to school. He expressed hope that the war would soon end and he would be reunited with his family. So there's your introduction, Megan.
And you're not going to have an answer for me, are you?
Yeah, I am.
Oh.
I am.
Okay.
Well, actually, I'm not going to give it to you. I'm going to make you work for it this week.
Okay.
All of you, not just you. So Gallagher's estate, I have since found out, is where Jack lives, my son. It was an area of 40 acres in the early settlement of Cessnock. Gallagher Street is almost directly across the road from East Cessnock Primary School and runs up the side of the industrial estate. And Gallagher's estate went from Gallagher Street all the way to Victoria Street, which is the street that runs up the side of Bridges Hill Park. So that whole area was a development in 1916 and Ada and her husband were living there with their 3 children. Ada's body was first spotted by a steamer captain as he made his way up the Paterson River towards Tocal Homestead. The first time that he's seen it, he thought it was a log. And so he just didn't do much about it, just kept on his way. And then a few days later, he noticed the same log and it was caught up in some flood debris. The river had recently been in flood. And so he kind of took the boat over closer and he could see a coat and some hair. And he was like, this isn't great. I need to get help. But obviously, when you're in the middle of the river on a steamboat and you've got places to go, you can't just use your mobile and call up the police. So he headed back, collected the police and took them up the river on his steamer and helped fish the body out of the river. Ada was wearing a fairly recognisable coat, and so the police thought that was a great way to try and start tracking her down. So they went to some tailors and seamstresses and they were able to find the person who had created the coat. And they were able to confirm that it had been purchased by Ada Murray. After they figured out who she was, they needed to try and figure out how she ended up in the river. So they tracked down Mrs. Harrison, who was Ada's friend, and she was caring for her children. And as far as she knew, very similar to what was printed in the papers, Ada had appendicitis. She was catching the train from Cessnock train station to Maitland train station, so she could go to Maitland Hospital to have surgery on her appendix. Mrs. Harrison picked up the children from Ada's that morning and took them home to her house. And I'm assuming, because all of this research is just based off newspaper articles from Trove, I'm assuming that she would have just been waiting for word from her once she got home from hospital to bring the kids back. She did say that she had gone to the bank and taken out some money, which would have been Ada's husband's war service payment and that was going to cover the cost of, feeding the kids while Ada was in hospital. So that didn't really give the police anything much to go on. But she did mention that there was a boarder staying at the house, Mr. Charles Salter. And so they tracked him down, and Mr. Salter confirmed that Ada was indeed pregnant. He was the only person that was in her confidence in regards to this. And he felt quite comfortable to share quite a few things. He didn't give any confirmation on how the pregnancy occurred. He didn't say that they were in a relationship or anything like that. But he did confirm that he was living in their house and paying rent as a boarder since her husband had been overseas. He was sure to let the police know that he certainly warned her about the dangers of having a termination and told her not to go through with it, and was quite comfortable in letting them know that he drove her to the train station in Cessnock and let her get on that train to go to the home of a woman by the name of Mrs. Hughes, who lived on Oakhampton Road near Maitland, all by herself. He also told police that when she didn't return, he went to Mrs. Hughes' home to inquire about her whereabouts, and he was told that she had never been there by Mrs. Hughes. He went home to Ada's house, where he lived, and he did nothing. He didn't contact police. He didn't put in a missing persons report. He did nothing. There was no newspaper articles about that though, but there was plenty about how Ada was found in a certain condition and that she died from a hemorrhage after possibly trying to illegally procure a certain event. And this is how we reported on that. We didn't use the words. We didn't say she was pregnant. We just said that she was in a certain condition. This adds to the stigma that people find themselves in. In the early 1900s, abortion in Australia was illegal under almost all circumstances. The laws were inherited from Britain, particularly the Offences Against the Persons Act 1861, which made it a criminal act to procure a miscarriage, both for the woman herself and for anyone assisting her. The language of the law was vague but harsh. Any attempt to procure a miscarriage was punishable by life imprisonment. So we need to think about that as we move into the next part and think about the motives and the rebellion of those that were choosing to take that risk and why it's important. Do you know when abortion was decriminalised in Australia?
No.
The last state to decriminalise it was Western Australia, and that was in 2023.
What?
Yeah.
How do I not know that?
The first state was ACT in 2002.
Wow.
The introduction of the oral contraceptive pill in the 1960s was a significant turning point. The pill began to be prescribed in Australia in 1961, but it was initially only available to married women. It wasn't until the 1970s that unmarried women gained the right to access birth control without restrictions through the lobbying of the Family Planning Association, which played a huge role in advocacy pushing for more access to contraception and sexual education. But Ada Murray had access to none of this in 1916. In the year of her death, it was easier to send a child to an orphanage than it was to have a woman admitted to hospital. I couldn't get the exact results for 1916, but in 1911, there were over 100 major institutions officially listed in Australia for neglected or destitute children, plus many more small informal church-run homes that weren't always counted in official statistics. New South Wales alone had more than 60 institutions by the early 1900s. Victoria had 50. In the same year in New South Wales, there was about 50 hospitals, and in Victoria, 40. There were less hospitals than there were orphanages. Mm-hmm. And this is where Mrs. Hughes comes in. And you know where I found her information? In the records of the Newcastle Industrial School. Surprise, surprise, one of the orphanages we just mentioned. Mary Ann Firth, who later became Mary Ann Hughes, was born in Tamworth on the 31st of May, 1860. Marianne, along with her sisters Ellen and Jane and their brother John, were arrested around the 10th of January 1871 by Constable Stave of the Tamworth Police under a warrant issued under the Industrial Schools Act. The children had been reported as abandoned and without means of support. It's unclear whether their parents, John and Anastasia, had been living together prior to the children's arrest, leaving the question of who had actually abandoned them unanswered. John was admitted to the Vernon Industrial School on the 18th of January. His three sisters, including Marianne, were admitted to Newcastle Industrial School on the 16th of January. Marianne was 12 years old at the time of her arrest. The Newcastle Industrial School opened in 1867 to house girls labelled as neglected or uncontrollable, but most had simply been born poor, orphaned, or outside of marriage. Life inside the industrial school was brutal. Girls spent their days doing laundry, sewing and cleaning, preparing for life as domestic servants. Education was limited, punishments were harsh, and the conditions were overcrowded and unhealthy. By the time it closed in 1871, the school had left a legacy of trauma and showed how society punished vulnerable young girls instead of protecting them. Marianne was moved to the Billa Industrial School on Cockatoo Island in Sydney Harbour, where she stayed until 1873. In March of that year, permission was sought to apprentice her to Patrick Mannion in Goulburn, where she would work for 6 years at a progressively increasing wage. Despite just being 12 years old when she was admitted to Newcastle Industrial School, Marianne was described as conducting herself well, and the apprenticeship was approved. However, it's unclear how long she stayed with Mannion, as she was reunited with her family members around 1878 and returned to the Hunter Valley. Around this time, Marianne is believed to have married Richard Jonathan Joshua Hughes. By 1915, Marianne was working as a nurse in West Maitland, living on Oakhampton Road by the Hunter River. It was during this time that she gained a reputation as a midwife, but was also accused of performing abortions. I can find 3 records of Marianne involved in trials and inquests in relation to abortions, including the inquest of Ada Murray's death in 1916. She was not found guilty of any of these charges, but it's possible that she was briefly incarcerated in Maitland Jail while awaiting trial. There is also speculation that she may have lost her job as a nurse due to women seeking her assistance. It seems that by the time Ada asked Mary for help, she was no longer working at Maitland Hospital. Marianne's husband, Richard, or perhaps partner, because I can't find a marriage certificate for them anywhere, even though she shared his surname, died in 1900. The last I can find about Marianne is that in March 1917, her home on Oakhampton Road was destroyed by fire, before her obituary appeared in the Maitland Daily Mercury on the 28th of June 1926. The funeral of the late Mrs. Marianne Hughes left the residence of her daughter, Mrs. H. Stay, Station Street, Homeville. Deceased was born in Tamworth but had lived the greater part of her life in and around the West Maitland district. She was confined to her bed for the past 10 months. Yesterday, her remains were interred in the Roman Catholic Cemetery at Campbell's Hill. The chief mourners were listed as Mrs. M. Moylan, who was her sister, Mr. J. Firth, who was her brother, and her 3 daughters, Mrs. Stay, Mrs. Digby, and Mrs. Creek. It did make me feel a little bit better to know that she'd been reconnected with her sisters and brothers, even though they were separated, and that they were still in her life the whole way through. I have read a lot about the inquest into Ada's death, but I'm not going to tell you about that because I just want you to make up your own mind. And I know Tim hates it when I do this. I haven't wrapped up this story in a neat and tidy bow with my own speculation of how Ada's body ended up in that riverbank. I have read the reports around the inquest into her death, but I really want everyone to come up with their own conclusion. And how you feel about that conclusion might leave you with some questions, hopefully, about yourself. I can guarantee you there was not one decision made by either of these women that wasn't made in sheer desperation. This is like the wrap up. Have you got any questions you want to add?
Who killed her?
She died of a hemorrhage.
Who tied lead to her?
There is no official documentation about who put her body in the river, and I'm assuming the lead was tied there to make her body sink. From a witness report who was fishing on the evening that they believe Ada's body was placed into the river, he seen a car pull up and something carried to the river and thrown in. He makes the comment that it was probably men because it looked like it was heavy. Somebody else, another, I'm assuming, witness, but he wasn't witness to that. He was witness to the fact that he found a carpet on the riverbank, which he took home and his wife boiled, and he didn't think much about it until a couple of weeks later when this was in the newspaper. And he talked to the police and said, look, I found this carpet, but I brought it home. It was in good condition, but it had some stains on it. And when my wife boiled it, it looked like there was blood in the carpet. So we're assuming that the body was taken from Marianne's house.
Was there carpet missing at Marianne's house?
I don't know. Because she says she had nothing to do with it. She says she never met Ada Murray.
Okay.
And that's her firm stance. But there are two other cases that directly link Marianne Hughes. One is a death post-termination with a woman who contracted septicemia. The other is a woman who named Marianne Hughes when she was in hospital after trying to procure a certain event. And when she believed she was dying, she sang her name from the rooftops. But then she got better. And while she was in hospital, they obviously gave her medicine and her infection cleared up. And so then when she appeared at the inquest, she backpedaled to China. She was like, no, I've never met her. I don't know why I said that. So while she was ill, she was happy to name Marianne. But when it came that she got better and she knew she could go home and she would have to live again in society, there was no way that she was going to say that she'd been and tried to secure an abortion. Mm-hmm. When she had to show a face at church and the market, she couldn't have her convicted then. So she just backpedaled and said, oh, no, I don't know her. And the police treated her as a hostile witness and they accused her of changing a story and she stuck to it 100%. I can put the inquest notes into our show notes so people can have a read through it themselves. It's pretty obvious that I've tied these two together. I've mentioned that Marianne was questioned at the inquest. But what I really wanted was for people to just listen to those two stories side by side and then just check their own feelings about it. I had to check mine because my first response was, that bitch from Oakhampton Road put her in a river. And then I started to think about it, and the more I researched it, and I had to look at her motives for doing what she did. She was at risk every time she performed a termination of going to jail forever. She had 8 children. What is the driving force behind that? She was arrested at 12 years old. She grew up in an orphanage. She knew what life was like for kids who weren't wanted. She worked as a nurse. People obviously came to her over and over again asking for help. She wasn't part of the problem. She was part of the resistance. And the more I learn about her life, I couldn't be angry at her. And yes, she put a body in the river, but she was in desperation. I can't judge her for that. I can't look at her and think in a time where there are hundreds of women who can't get access to the medical care that they should be allowed to access, how she was doing anything other than helping people who needed help. Mm-hmm. You don't risk going to prison for a couple of bucks. I had to check my privilege a couple of times in this. Like, I live here and we're in this time and I could access this if I needed to. We have watched how in other countries those laws have been put in place to give women access to healthcare and then they've been taken away. It wasn't too long ago that a woman who had a miscarriage in the US was actually charged because they believed that she may have brought the miscarriage on herself. It was overturned in court, but this woman had just lost her friggin' baby. And because someone, somewhere, very likely a man, questioned why she lost her baby, she was charged and she was put on trial because they thought that maybe she had brought it about. Another woman who was addicted to methamphetamine lost her child. When she went to the hospital afterwards, they charged her because they said that her drug abuse had brought about her miscarriage. If that woman with a drug addiction lived in a state that permitted legal abortion, she likely would have never been put in that position in the first place. There is a bigger fish to fry in this. It's not Marianne Hughes. It's the people who are making decisions about women's bodies, and it has happened forever. And those people in those states that have been charged and ended up in court did at one time live in a country where it was legal to access termination. We live now in a world, I'll show you the map, where the division of women who are capable of accessing this it's pretty 50-50. I'll put the map in the show notes. Privilege is knowing there's a problem and not caring about it because it doesn't affect you.
Yep.
We live here in this time and we have access if we need it. But there are still women all over the world. And when you look at Egypt and Iraq and lots of places in the Middle East, we're not just talking about women accessing the healthcare that they need. We're talking about rape not being illegal. We're talking about women not being able to choose what they want to wear when they get up in the morning, not being able to go out in public with their skin showing. These rules have been put in place for the history of time, generally by powerful men. And I just don't think you can listen to a story like this without acknowledging our privilege and understanding that, okay, while it might not be a big, huge problem for us here right now, it is for so many other people. And if we don't keep talking about it, then nothing's ever going to change for anyone else. Desperation pushes people into risk. When the system turns away, people don't stop needing help. They just stop being safe. We talk about progress like it's a guarantee, like rights once granted can never be taken away. But even now, a woman's right to choose is still up for debate. Even now, there are people who believe they should have the final say over another person's body, and it's almost never their body that's on the line. Here, now, in this country, we are lucky. We have choice, despite the persisting stigma. But privilege is not universal, and it's not permanent. All over the world, women are still fighting for the most basic thing, the right to choose survival without fear. This story is not just about the past. It's all about the battles that are still being fought, in courts, in hospitals, in homes, in silence. In the words of Margaret Atwood, better never means better for everyone. It always means worse for some.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of If These Trees Could Talk. If you would like to access more about the places or information included in today's topic, please visit our website ifthesetreescouldtalk.com.au. If you would like to follow us on our adventures, check us out on Facebook or Insta. Our creative writer is Shannon Walters, and our podcast is produced at Bellevue Studio in the Hunter Valley with audio production by Megan Anderson. We love to hear your feedback, so please rate and review, and if you would like to hear more, please subscribe. We look forward to you joining us for our next adventure.